right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my first lecture. We talked about today medieval Europe and life that was going on in Europe as the development of the Native Americans across the Atlantic in the New World eventually. Medieval Europe was pretty much the setting that we're going to pick up our story after the fall of the Roman Empire, the Middle and the Dark Ages, as they're known as, about 500 to 1000 AD. And you can imagine, I likened it to the power going off here in our modern world and everything reverting back to kind of the Stone Age. For about 500 years, all people would care about is survival. And this was after the fall of the Roman Empire. And you guys might remember or reflect on it as a time period that was predominantly based on the concepts and ideas of knights and shining armor. But let's get to the story a little bit. The lack of a central government with the fall of the Roman Empire. There was constant warfare, and people stopped trading with each other. The roads deteriorated. Life in Europe completely went to a very isolated mode of survival. And so people were afraid of war and the wars and the fighting that took place as the chaos reigned over who would take control over different territories led to a lot of destruction of libraries and schools and museums and things that mark culture and growth and expansion. So because education was neglected and people focused on survival alone, the next 500 years was pretty dark and very minimal. The only thing that held everything together was called feudalism. And we kind of termed that as the idea was these, whoever the people who had the land and had the power and had the authority, they kind of restored order and ensured the protection for the lower class of people from invaders and people coming in. And again, it's made up this time period of kings, lords, knights, peasants. Basically, this is a good little illustration of it. You can see that the king has most of the power, but you're never any better than the base of your power and your structure there, and the peasants were the ones that made up that structure. So probably should have been treated better. But either way, this became an economic system, a cultural system, and a religious one. The feudal system, as the manor system as we know it, was about land. Whoever had land had most of the power. Whoever's manor was largest, they had all the power that they needed. And the peasants would work on the land and provide services for the landowners, and the upper class would then essentially end up, you know, making it so that they would serve the needs of the upper class for kind of a price, and the price was protection. And the manor was almost entirely self-sufficient, thus no trade or expansion was needed. And you know, unfortunately, that was the way life was. Feudalism divided society into classes, and kings, greater lords, lesser lords, and knights, and then peasants and townspeople. And ultimately, you were determined who you were at birth. And because of that, there was no social mobility, which meant there was no ladder to climb. Which, again, in turn, meant that you were what you were born into being. And that's kind of an unfortunate concept, which is why America doesn't have that. We have a ladder to climb, and you can continue to get your education and learn and grow and choose a path that you want. Ultimately, the one thing that held everything together was the religious values. There's 5 things that people care about when all you care about survival, and the first 4 deal with your family and protection, food and clothing and water and shelter, and then you deal with what happens to life after you die. And that kind of came in terms of religion would establish that concept. So the religious system at the time was the Roman Catholic Church, the only remnants of the Holy Roman Empire, and it held together almost all of Western Europe under the leadership of one person, and that Pope provided the stability to the church and to the people, and whatever he said must have come from God, so therefore people listened to it, and that's how they kind of lived their lives, and so it was very minimalistic. And unfortunately, the church at the time period was not very tolerant of other people and religions that were going on around the world that were contrary to the philosophies of the Catholics. And by the late Middle Ages, 1000 AD, discrimination again was an all-time high, and the church started to teach that Only those who believe in the teaching of the Catholic Church will be saved. And so they wanted to spread that mission and head out there into the world and tell people about that. The Crusades were called upon by the Pope, which he declared kind of a holy war against the Muslims in the Middle East. And ultimately, by declaring that holy war, the goal became to recapture the Holy Lands in Jerusalem. Well, none of these people for the last 500 years have gone anywhere. So going to, thousands of miles away from their home to a foreign land was going to be a completely new education for them. And it lasted over a period of 200 years. The Christians failed to regain the Holy Lands, permanently anyway, for Christians. But amidst all their travels and amidst all their fighting and everything that was going on and how far they went, what they did find is that the Muslim world was filled with all sorts of new things. And so the best part about this transition and this fighting and everything that went on was the cultural diffusion that took place. And ultimately, that's the best part about it, is that European contact with the Muslim world resulted in the exchange of ideas and interest that stem from the Middle East and Asian parts of the world. Other than that, they would have never had exposure to those parts of the world. And by the time they came home, these men that returned from the Crusades brought an amazing renaissance, a renewed interest in learning and gaining knowledge about the outside world, which eventually would encourage trade, which encouraged exploration, and then obviously discovery of new things. And so this was a huge turning point in European history. And it really led to some great things. Revival of trade, European desire for foreign goods. These men came home from the Crusades, and everybody's like, "Yeah, let's head to the east and find out what Asia has to offer." Serfs started to run away from towns, and they bought their freedom and began to become tenant farmers. And next thing you know, there's a different class of people. The manor system starts to fold and fall apart. Italy starts to dominate because of its location in the Mediterranean, and it decreases feudalism. Trade decreased the system that was holding Europe together, so it's going to be held together by a new system. And now the middle class, merchants and craftsmen start to arise, and the power of the kings increases due to trade that they control. So the source of wealth starts to shift from land to money, and the kings that were strong enough started to seek to build and expand their empire through more trade with Asia. And so that required that they find quicker, cheaper trade routes to Asia. Guys like Marco Polo, who are gone for 27 years, that's just not fast enough. And so for the next 200 years, they send out exploratory teams and focusing their attention on exploration. And because of that, you have amazing things get discovered. And guys like Christopher Columbus and Vasco da Gama and eventually Magellan and all these different people that head out and in seeking ways to see the world, they discover the world. And it becomes pretty impressive, and we've never really ended the Renaissance. We've always constantly, as a society, we've always tried to improve ourselves. And some of the causes of exploration, pretty straightforward. They wanted faster, cheaper trade routes to Asia. They wanted to explore so that they could seek God, gold, and glory, and in the process spread Christianity, while increasing their knowledge about everything. The curiosity about the rest of the world was immense, and specifically Asia, because they have all the cool stuff where the Muslims got stuff. And so essentially, the effects of exploration are also pretty straightforward. The Northwest Passage, after Columbus discovered this new land and Amerigo Vespucci claimed that it was new land, everybody wanted to get through it because it was now in the way of their ultimate goal, which was to get to North America and get through North America to Asia. And so the Northwest Passage was what they started to seek, and they never found it all the way until we got to Lewis and Clark, until finally they said, nope, there is no Northwest Passage. And European settlements are founded because of that. Trade and mercantilism grows. European nations compete for these colonies and who gets to have control. And the Native Americans start to have conflicts. I mean, obviously they're here. That's what we learned about first, is that these are thriving cultures that are now being challenged. And unfortunately, slavery is also introduced into the Americas because of exploration. And lastly, the clash of these three cultures. Native Americans, African, and European will now, come to a screeching halt in the New World. So anyway, I hope that you enjoy your first lecture over Edmodo, and that you're able to stay caught up. Thanks a lot. Have a good one.